So when we started the farm in 2020, we did a few initial test batches, 30 birds each, and those sold immediately. So we thought in that first year, maybe we could sell 500 chickens. And we ended up, I think it was around 11 or 1,200 chickens total that first year, plus a few Thanksgiving turkeys. And so the second year, we thought, wow, our product's pretty expensive. You know, it's not Walmart chicken by any stretch of the imagination. So maybe we could do 1,500 in the following year. So we ordered 1,500 birds for the second year. And we ended up finishing somewhere around 2,000. So, you know, and then each year it just kept going like that. We'd have a number in mind that we thought we could do. And what we ended up finishing was, you know, just another 500, 600, 700 more than what we thought. And so in 2024, we did a little bit over 5,000 chickens. We did 300 turkeys, and we had about 250 laying hens, and that was on 35 acres of land total that we farmed on. Yeah, no vegetables at all. There was we actually got a high tunnel grant from NRCS, and we put up a high tunnel, and we did vegetables for a couple of years, but each year we were gung-ho at the beginning of the year. We got the high tunnel planted, and then as the chickens started coming in and we started processing every week, we just weren't able to keep up with the vegetables. You know, weeds got out of control, pests got out of control, and so the vegetables always kind of fizzled by mid-season. And so after 2 years of trying to do both the poultry and some vegetables, we just gave up on the vegetables and said we're a poultry farm, and that's what we're going to do, and that's what we're going to be known for. So we were farming full-time. Our situation was a little unique since we didn't start this at a very young age, so we did have some retirement income. But our plan was, after an initial cash infusion to buy all the equipment and get the farm up and running, that the farm would become self-sufficient. So it wouldn't necessarily pay our mortgage or our electric bill or water bill for our house, but it would, you know, the farm would be able to supply all of its own feed and make all those purchases that were necessary to support itself, whether that meant it broke even or made a little bit of a profit. So we were farming full-time, but we never looked to the farm to support our personal lives, but just support itself, since we had some retirement income to rely on for our personal life. Looking back now, I wish that we had spent a year here in Greeneville. When we moved from California, we basically moved and immediately started going into production. And I wish we had spent a year visiting all the farmers markets, talking to other producers in the area, whether they were producing animals or vegetables, whatever, and getting a better sense for what the demand might be for the product we were thinking of producing. Because that was our biggest surprise, was the level of demand that there was for pastured poultry. And I always felt like we were playing catch up, because we didn't have a good sense going in of what that demand was going to be. It was way beyond our expectations. And so we were always we would start the season thinking one thing, and we'd end up at a totally different place, much greater than what we expected. And so we were always just behind from the beginning of the season, it seemed like, every year, just chasing it. So I wish now that we had just taken that time to learn the market, learn the area, and what the potential was for what we wanted to do. I think we would have gone bigger from out the gate. So we initially, because we had these numbers in mind, so when we bought all of our processing equipment, we bought that for one scale, and we very quickly outgrew all of that. And so then, in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, we were gradually replacing equipment and moving to larger scale equipment. But we had already made that initial investment in the small scale equipment. So, what should have cost us, say $12,000 if we had just bought the bigger equipment at the beginning, cost us $18,000 because we spent $6,000 initially to buy the small scale equipment and then had to turn around and spend the $12,000 to buy the large scale equipment. So I think we would have gone larger right out of the gate had we known what the potential was, and it would have definitely saved us some financial resources doing that. I think the most critical thing to having a successful farm, and I'll say that this answer is probably specific to a direct-to-consumer farm where you're having to develop those relationships with your customers. It's to really love what you're doing. You need to show your customers the passion for what you're doing, the passion for the product that you're producing, and why they should be buying from you and not a supermarket or perhaps another local farmer. There is competition in the market. And so if you don't really love what you're doing, I think it's very evident to customers when they start talking to you that your passion doesn't come through. And that might just be a turnoff for a lot of them. So I would say just really make sure whatever you're doing is what you want to be doing and something that you love doing, and convey that to your customers. At the end of the day, you can love farming, you can love what you're doing, but you have to make money. It's a business, and it has to be able to at least support itself and pay its bills. There were a couple of times where we did have to pivot. I mean, one was the vegetables. We had to admit that we didn't have the people resources necessary to try and run two very different enterprises that require two different skill sets, two different levels of input and attention to what you're producing. And we had to just admit that we couldn't do both and cut our losses on the vegetables. We also had to kind of pivot on our production. There were plenty of times when things didn't go right, whether you have an off batch of feed and the birds don't perform as well on that. So yeah, there's always things that come up, and you need to learn from everything, whether it goes right or wrong. Everything is a learning opportunity in farming. You always have to be the Monday morning quarterback and evaluate everything in hindsight and see what worked and what didn't, and figure out how you're going to move going forward to keep the operation successful. Can you make a good living being a chicken farmer without another job? Absolutely. Our issue was not lack of sales. Our issue was trying to figure out how to keep production increasing to meet demand. Is that going to be the same in every part of the country and every market? Probably not. And that's where kind of that market knowledge study before you decide to get into something, talk to other farmers, go to farmers markets, strike up conversations with some of the customers is what you're thinking of selling, something they're looking for. But yeah, with pastured poultry, I think right now, in general, the sky is the limit. Consumers are, to a large degree, starting to lose a lot of faith in corporate big ag. They see recalls in the news all the time of products that, have been tainted with E. coli or salmonella or whatever. They're trying to steer away from artificial inputs and pesticides and things like that. And so customers are starting to wake up to the downside of cheap food. And they're understanding that it's cheap to buy that food, but there's a lot of long-term costs in terms of what it's doing to our health. Right now, I think, you can make a good living being a chicken farmer, pastured chicken farmer, selling direct to consumer, because the demand is there. It's extremely strong.
Yeah, when new farmers come, and we're teaching Flower Farming 101, and you can kind of sense when people are just excited about growing flowers and having them. And that's wonderful. And we do some workshops where we teach people to just grow flowers and have fun with them. But when they're at that workshop, we try to really emphasize, you're going to burn out in 2 or 3 years at the most if you're just growing this and being frustrated because you can't make any money, because it's expensive to get going in flowers. If you've got to till soil, if you're going to, we tell people, don't get an unheated hoop right away. Don't build any infrastructure, because that's expensive, and you've got to know that you're going to make enough money. And figuring out how to make the money is really important. You've got to look every year. You've got to know, how much did I make this, and this? What can I do next year that will increase some of those avenues? What avenues can I drop because they weren't profitable? And if you want to grow something fun just for yourself, that's fine. But if you're going to be a profitable farmer, you've got to figure, where is my revenue going to come from?
You have to start out knowing it's a business and knowing you need to make a profit. And so sometimes it may be better just to start out small and then build your business. And then the goal there would be, you expand your business, you build your business, you start getting into so-called assets by using your farm profit for that expansion, or use your farm profit to buy infrastructure, or use your farm profit to buy machinery, and grow your farm that way. Be careful about getting into too much debt. I mean, I know you have to take out loans, but you have to be careful about it and run the numbers. You have all this great information, and y'all do such great work, but the important thing to remember is, maybe you don't need a 50 horsepower tractor. Maybe you can get by with 20 horsepower that doesn't cost as much. Or if you think that you're going to need that, then you've got to look at it and say, that accountants will tell you that $50,000 tractor is a $50,000 asset. All right, next year it's not worth $50,000. It depreciates. Now it's down to $42,000. The next year it may be worth $35,000. So those assets depreciate, and for you to cover that depreciation, that equipment has to be making money for you. You have to understand things like that. Even to the point, like, you get grants to buy hoop houses and stuff like that. Those are great programs, but just because that money is free doesn't mean you don't need to make a profit on that hoop house. Even though it's free money, you got to make a profit on that hoop house, because that hoop house is costing you money, upkeep, to use it, to grow crops in it, to sell those crops. So, don't just buy stuff just to be buying stuff because it looks good or somebody told you to buy it. Make sure it is actually going to help your business, is what I would say.
If I knew how far picking up those flowers in the fields was going to take me, I would do it, but I might, of course, this is me now at an older age thinking of the work. I might say, you don't have to grow so much. You don't have to take the business as far as we've taken it. And that sounds wrong, but it's just, I'll think, would I have been happy just growing less and having a few folks in? I don't know. Maybe I would have. I'm not regretting it. I'm just saying, you never know where something's going to go until you take it there. And I'm one of those 100% people. I'm all in. I'm thinking, we can do this, we can do that. And he's here going, whoa, whoa, whoa. And maybe I should have listened to a few more whoas. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. That would have been good.
Yeah, I think I was raised to think I could do anything. My parents, without ever saying it, just assumed we would do well. And I think that's been I'm very thankful for the way my parents raised me. But I think when we started Flowers, I did not think at all about failure. I thought, we can do this. And when I went into weddings, I thought, we can do this. I'd go to a big design workshop, fancy, and I'd come away and I'd go, I did fine. I can do this. And I think that attitude really helps you. And there are failures along the way, but you have to look at it as a failure, as something you learned and you don't repeat. But even now, as we're going to be doing less, we're already really consciously thinking about the next things we're going to do. And I think we know we're not just going to fall on our face, and I think that attitude you can learn by being prepared and seeing what's out there and matching your skill set, your resources and whatnot with what you have. But I think if you're afraid of failure, farming would be a tough business.
Yeah, you have to be willing to take some chances, because no matter how well you plan, there are always going to be some things that are not going to work out, and you have to adapt to that. You can even set up a plan on, here's what I want to happen, here's my plan on making it happen, and then have, alternative plans there. Well, if this goes wrong, what would be the best option to go to? If this goes wrong here, do you drop it? Do you fix it? Do you, switch gears? You can do all that kind of planning and have it worked out and know that, nothing is going to work out the way you think it's going to. So just be prepared to be creative. That's probably one of the things maybe that I regret. When I was young and I was stuck into, just this vision of what I wanted to do, I think that I could have maybe have been a full-time farmer if I'd been more creative in the way I thought, more creative in the enterprises that I would be willing to try.
If you'd have married me. So.
Yeah, now that definitely would have made it farming more creative, no question about that. But yeah, you've got to plan ahead. You've got to set your goals. You got to know where you're going, have a plan to get there, but always be willing to adjust. Always be willing to move on when something goes wrong.
And I think it's important that you surround yourself with positive people. Mm-hmm. We have not had anyone here who was a negative Nelly kind of thing. And the kids that have worked for us have, not everyone is wonderful. They are all wonderful right now. But, they were kids who wanted to learn, who could see and had good ideas. And even the people who come to the workshops or that come to the farm tours, they're positive. Farming draws positive people. We used to teach school, and, it's like we'd have one negative kid that could ruin the whole semester for us just with that attitude, and that just carried them with it. We don't find that on this farm, and we're very thankful for that. And we have farmer friends with big farms with big staffs, and they'll be talking about, they have to get rid of someone because they're just killing it.
One bad employee can ruin the other good employees.
But you want kids who want the farm to succeed. You want them to not just be there putting in a day, but you want them to be excited about the next thing, have ownership in the next thing, and they're succeeding along with you. And I think that's...
Yeah, it's important for employees to know or feel like they're a part of it, and that, they have an important part, and you trust their judgment, you trust their feedback and stuff like that. That's a big help too.
I'm very lucky to be on family property. So the lease agreement was very much, even though it's challenging long term, was very easy to begin. So access to land allowed us to have a reduction in monthly or twice a year rental income or rental fee. And then I worked a part-time job. I either was a massage therapist or I did random gigs in the winter, a slew of different stuff. And I would take that money to either live off of, and then any product that we did make off the farm, all that would be reinvested back in the farm by either planting more acreage, buying equipment. And so I didn't have to draw profit off of the farm. And I, over the last decade, have been just cycling that back into the farm. And now we've gotten to a point where we can start to pull an hourly wage off of the farm. It took a lot of juggling, crop failures, so it was always a time thing. It's like, okay, well, this year, how much money do we have to participate in the TAPE grant, or how much money do we have to buy this equipment that would help a 2 to 3 person operation be more efficient and be able to do more with less.
And that was a choice, an active choice, that we didn't want to go into massive debt. That's where the part-time work came in, and now we're at the point that we're building out infrastructure that fulfills. We've decided how much we want to make, and we're at the point that we know how many acres we need to produce to meet that. And it's the first year that, it just takes time. But,
Yeah.
making those smart decisions
Mhm.
of really looking at the numbers to see, well, are we just wasting our time, or how can we spend our time more efficiently to make money off the farm?
So yeah, it's been a balance of like, okay, how much money did we make off this crop this year? Is that something we want to do? If we wanted to add a new idea, I would only add one new thing a year so that it wouldn't be overwhelming, or I wouldn't have a failure. Or if it was a failure, then it would be a small failure, and it wasn't like I just planted, 5 acres of watermelons and they all got took over by the weeds. Whereas I learned how to cultivate weeds. Since we're a certified organic farm, we're not using herbicides. So all those things, we looked at a long-term approach of slowly seeing if we could find a market, what does the market really want, and what's the sweet spot of balancing our per hour work. We just factor in basically what would it cost on the labor market to replace ourselves. Is that and it seems to be $15 to $20 an hour. So that's how much we put in and factor into our price points for our product. And so we just look at our time, and we based our crops that we grow based off of that. Like, okay, strawberries, it takes forever to pick those. We don't get the yield, and all of a sudden we're paying ourselves an hourly rate, but we're not making as much money as growing a watermelon, which we could plant once, pick once, and sell once. So we're touching the product less, so there's less hourly wage. So we just kind of looked at that across all of our different products we offered.
And that works for our farm. Camp Creek is a very windy area, so we don't have any high tunnels on the top of the ridge because they would be gone.
Yeah.
So we've had to work with where we're at with the land. In the winter, we get winds we've had 120 miles per hour winds, and you can't do certain things. So if strawberries work, and for other people, that may be good, but it just didn't work for us.
So we work with what the land is offering us. We have water, so we can irrigate, but we also have a drawback of wind.
We've set ourselves up that we never rely on one enterprise or one market for more than 50% of our income. If one of them drops, we need to know that we have at least 75% of our other sales outlets working hard, or at least if we have a crop failure for one of those enterprises, like last year with the storm, Helene was horrible for the region, and we were lucky we didn't lose topsoil. We did lose a big corn crop, and you just go with it and figure it out and know that not all of your money is just in the corn or just in one crop. So figuring it out and having those plans in place pretty quickly. The most recent pivot has been funding cuts, and that shifted our sales outlets a little bit. We were working with some major food hubs on getting large quantities of grain specifically out to them, that were working through a subsidized food program and getting grain into families that were using primarily SNAP. With that cut, we've just had to recently figure out which wholesale accounts we could increase, and trying to talk to more restaurants and other grocers to see what sticks. So that's the most recent pivot.
Yeah, and then I would say with the pivoting, we, like watermelons, for example, I had reached the 7-year mark of the new acre that I planted, and we had 2 years of heavy frost, and we're getting very little yield. So I was like, I woke up one spring, saw frost was happening on the forecast. You can kind of see the waves of spring warming up and going back to winter. And I'm like, I need to grow watermelons this year. And so to be able to supplement that cash, because we were starting to scale up the farm that summer. And so that's one reason why I got into watermelons, was to be able to have that cash flow of a crop. I never dreamed I would be a grain farmer. And so we started out extremely small, because I didn't think, one, there seemed to be this old rumor that you can't grow wheat you could grow wheat for animal feed, but you can't grow wheat for milling. But that's also, though, a misnomer with the education that I had to learn myself, which was that grain is not a box of white enrichment Pillsbury, flour at the grocery store. Flour is something that's living, that just experimentation to be able to make a loaf of bread. And you can make it from any grain. It might not be this beautiful, fluffy gorgeous loaf that's on Instagram, but it is a healthy loaf that you could feed your family. That's tasty, and you'll get better at it as you grow. That's specific to sourdough. You could also chuck yeast in there and make a nice little instant flour. And so we slowly grew that over 4 years, and now we're growing, around 15 acres of grain across 4 different varieties of wheat. And so pivoting again, it's not minor little pivots. These are just little tiny adjustments on the knobs of like we're growing different grains that harvest at different intervals so that over the course of like 3 to 4 weeks, which is a long time because most guys would rather be done in like 3 days with harvesting wheat. But by doing that over a harvest window of 3 weeks, you're now, if you get rain at the end of June, okay, well then maybe the next week it's drier. So that crop might have been, the protein levels might not have been as best that first harvest, but now the second one, it is actually perfect. So it's like timing those windows within our farming enterprises and then spreading out diversity even amongst what? Same thing with blueberries. We have 8 different varieties of blueberries, again, to spread out the harvest time. Some of them crack because it rains too much, but they're delicious blueberries, so you'd want to grow it. Next year it might be fine. So those little mini adjustments on the knobs are what most farmers use to adjust. So something to keep in mind as you're becoming a farmer of like, okay, how can I spread my risk out amongst farming?
The other crop would be sorghum. So we were looking at crops that fit with our timeline of our markets and our energy. And we wanted to have a sweetener for ourselves anyways, other than maple syrup. And how can we get sugar locally? Just going back to the grain, how can we get flour locally? So we grew some sorghum out and looked at our time and costs of everything and figured out when it was October, when we were trying to sell at the farmer's market, a jar of sorghum syrup. We looked at all those numbers and we figured, well, we need to sell it for this amount, and we did it. And Duane thought, no, nobody will buy it at that cost. But we needed to make that amount per jar, and we sold it, and we sold out that year. So trusting the numbers sometimes, there's the human factor of you just have to feel people out of, is this something people want? But looking at the numbers, you've got to make money off of it.
Yeah, so we looked again at the $15 to $20 per hour of how much we could replace ourselves for. We tracked our time of how long it took us to harvest sorghum. We were very fortunate to work with a neighbor, Harold Finley over in Hot Springs, who lent us his press, lent us his kettle, where we cooked it off. But we factored in our time from planting to putting it into a jar, and then that equaled our price for pretty much right on the money. And that's not even taken into what most people do with value added, which is adding another third or a grocery margin. And it sold out. Lindsey was right. I was incorrect on the price point. I was really surprised, but we did go to some unique markets, winter Christmas markets that helped it be a gift. So would that work on a normal year? So we probably should scale up, grow more, cook off more syrup during that time window to be able to compound, our time, produce more for our time put in.